all of you. Okay. Are we ready, Vanessa? So, all right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming out. And it's my honor to introduce Tal Schneider tonight. And Tal comes to us, of course, all the way from Israel, though she's been around for a week or so in the States, touring and speaking in a few different places, including last night she got to speak in glorious Joliet, and now up here with us. So it's very nice. The night before that was Milwaukee, and so on and so forth. But Tal currently writes for the Times of Israel. You can read her work online. It's quite beautiful and quite remarkable. I mean, the wide variety of stories that you cover. I've enjoyed reading them over these last months. And before that, among other things, she was the DC correspondent for Ma'ariv daily newspaper in Israel, living in Washington, DC area, actually Rockville, Maryland, for 7 years. And so she has some familiarity with the issues that are our issues here in the United States, but also more importantly, has a finger on the pulse on things that are going on in the state of Israel today. So it's my honor to introduce Tal Schneider. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, hi. So hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here, to those of you who are here and to people in the houses on the Zoom. And I am so excited because I think you prepared a wonderful weather for me, knowing that I'm coming from Israel. You made sure I will not be suffering and I don't have to use my hat or gloves. And it's just really a great welcome to Chicago area where it's so warm and spring-like, almost as if I'm in Israel. So really wonderful time. And as said here, I'm a political reporter before, and I'm covering, Israeli politicians most of the time. And before I start, any of you know how come there were Israeli politicians, including women politicians, because it's a gender lecture today. How come we had Israeli politicians before the creation of the earth, before the Genesis? Any idea? Any idea? So I'll say it in Hebrew, in a biblical Hebrew. Ki haaretz hayta tohu vavohu. So I guess you know this verse. It means, obviously, for those of you who don't know, it means that the land, it was disformed and chaotic. And we already had Israeli politicians walking there because I used to say that as a joke for my lectures a couple of years ago. And then we entered into those 2 years of 4 election cycles, and my verse became absolutely true. Israeli politicians are absolutely chaotic, and we went through as reporters, but not just reporters, the entire country. We went through 4 cycles of elections in 2.5 years, and that was really something that I don't wish for any of you to go through. And with that, I will jump right in, and I will talk about Israel's, gender politics. And just before that, hold on, let's see that it's working. So this is me up in the upper photo, traveling with the Israeli Prime Minister. This was taken just a couple of months ago, going to Glasgow with the new Prime Minister. By the way, the first photo obviously is Israel's. This is Israel's. Let's see if I can take this. Is it better? Yeah. This is Israel's new coalition, 8 parties. Those are the party chairs of the 8 parties that are comprising of Israel's new coalition. At the top of the table, you see Israel's new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. I suppose now most of you didn't hear about him, but he is 49 years old, coming from representing Israel right wing, mostly conservative religious Zionist and settlers communities, and he is the prime minister at the moment, but the rest of them we'll get to that later. Again, we are now traveling with the prime minister. That's the top photo, and on the bottom photo, you can see, maybe you recognize me in there, in the White House. I think this is maybe the Golan Heights announcement or so, and obviously, the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the former President Trump are sitting there just on that side, I suppose, but they're not in the photo because the person who framed the photo was, looking at Melania, and she's looking at us. That's the entire Israeli group of photographers and reporters escorting the Prime Minister and trying to get answers to some questions. And she's like, what are these guys doing? This is just me with Israel's Shimon Peres, former president, and then in the middle, the new president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, and on the right-hand side, is it right or left? Left-hand side, this is Rivlin, the former president. He just finished his candidacy, his term back in July, and president in Israel is not equivalent to the United States president. It's a non-executive, it's a non-executive role. It's just a ceremonial role. That's the reason they're being so nice to reporters, as you can see. And okay, it's up, but it's not up here. What are we? What can we do? Oh, maybe I stepped on something here. Anyway. Oh, there you go. This is just. I
just have to stand right
here. Maybe. No, it's just, yeah. Okay, maybe that's the cable. Anyways, this is just a photo album of me with some important people. Never mind that. And this is this is just like a preview before I start talking about the gender. This government that you see in this photo, the photo was taken on the day of the formation of the 34th government at the beginning on 2015. Obviously, this government grew up a little bit later to include more ministers. But as you can see, there are 3 women here, 3 ministers, and lots of ministers who are male. And later on, this government was enlarged to include more male ministers. So the ratio was even, lower. Just 3 ministers out of this group. You have the ultra-Orthodox, you have the Prime Minister at the front, and Benjamin Netanyahu, and other ministers. And I don't know if you can see in the back, I don't know, do you see my arrow? Yeah, so there's like the ultra-Orthodox minister here, another ultra-Orthodox minister here, and another ultra-Orthodox minister here. This is actually on the back there, this is Israel's Attorney General, he's not a minister. But you do see, religious people. By the way, this is Naftali Bennett right here. He was a minister in Netanyahu's government in the past. And look at the current government. This is Israel 36 government. They entered into power on June 13, 2021. There are 9 women ministers here. There is 1 minister who is coming from the Ethiopian community. Her name is Pnina Shate. There is another woman here in wheelchair. She's the energy minister. Her name is Kavin El-Ahrar. Pnina Shate is the Aliyah minister. Okay, and then you have, Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked, Education Minister, Science Minister, Transportation Minister Marav Michaeli, and more. So this government is actually, and also this government has 1 Muslim minister and another Druze minister. And the people here in this photo are also much younger than the former government. So this new government who entered on June, this late June, it's like 6 months. They're actually, I think, celebrating, what is today? The 14th. So yesterday they had 6 months, they were 6 months in power. Nobody gave them even a month. The people thought that, this is not going to work. But here they are, much more diverse and much more women in power. And it's a huge difference in Israel's society. I think this is the first time we have 9 ministers, women. It's not close to half, but it's at least it's something. And with that, I'm just looking into these women, and most of them are not familiar to you, but Orna Barbivaille, for example, she's the commerce minister, and she was aloof in IDF. She was a member of the Matkal, which is the governing body of the military. So she went to the highest possible rank in the military, other than chief IDF. That's very rare in Israel. She's the only woman who got there. She's the only woman since then was in that rank of a general. And she's now a part of Yair Lapid party. That's the second biggest party in Israel's parliament. Ayelet Shaked in the middle. She is the number 2 in the party of the prime minister. So this is what happened in this election. All of those 8 parties, not only of them, many parties in the parliament, put women on the second spot. So Orna Barbivaille was second to Yair Lapid. Ayelet Shaked was second to Naftali Bennett, the current prime minister. Merav Michaeli is a chairwoman of the Labour Party. She, if you remember the first photo, she's just the only woman at the top of the ticket. And Pnina Tamanu-Shata, the Ethiopian minister, she was second to Benny Gantz. And Tamar Zandberg, right here, she's now the EPA or Environment Protection Minister. She was second in her party as well. So that is something that never happened before in Israel's history. Many of those parties decided they have to put women in the second name on the ticket, even coming from the very far right side of the political map. Another party called the Religious Zionism. They also put a woman, a very, very orthodox, not ultra-orthodox, but very orthodox, conservative, family, anti-LGBT and so on party. They put a woman as a second. The Arabs, some of the Arabs party put a woman as a second and so on. So we have seen a change. Women were not on the top of the tickets, but second. It's a small step. It meant obviously that they are more exposed to the media, more invited to speeches, more invited to talk shows, radio talk shows. So Orna Barbivaille, for example, was on the radio every other day for the entire campaign and so on. And so yeah, I quote a sentence here saying, well-behaved women seldom make history. I think all feminists know that sentence. It was written by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, an American historian. And you do see here some women that broke the norms of behavior. For example, Miri Regev down here, she was a minister in the Likud, the ruling party for 40 years. She managed to get to the very high rank, office in the Israeli military for many years. And then she just, left the military and went into politics and into the Likud. And she is very well famous for her brutal and blunt language skills. So everybody know her very good because she's on the radio being very blunt to everybody. And it gave her prominence in Israel. The politics is very tough. And you see up here on the right, the left-hand side of you, right-hand side for me, this is the education minister. She rose to prominence during COVID by being on the other side of the former prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So everything he said about COVID, she resisted. And she was part of the parliament. She was a minister back then, but obviously because she gave the differing concept, the differing idea from the prime minister approach to COVID, she was all over the news, and then went into the fourth election campaign as a second person in Gideon Sa'ar party, another party. On the bottom of the screen. So for the first time in Israel's history, we have a member in the Knesset, she's not a minister, a woman that came from the Muslim Arab Society. And as you can see, she is giving a speech in the Knesset with the veil. This is something that we have never seen because the Muslim very religious party, did not allow women to participate until 2 years ago. So she's the first woman who's participating, and her name is Yassin, and she's the first one to participate in the Muslim Islamic Movement Party, and she's a member. She's a member of the coalition. She's not even in the opposition, because this party, and I will go to into that later, it's part of the government. So it's interesting. And this is just another photo, I mean, of them, moving along, certain issues in the Knesset. So when you look at the history of gender politics in Israel, before the country was formed in around 1920, we were what we call mandatory Palestine, and we had the first assembly of representative in Israel. It was not Israel at the time; it was Palestine. This assembly was not with legislating power, because it was just under the British rule. But we had 299 men and 15 women. I gave this number as a perspective so you can see the evolvement. So that's 4.3%, and later on, it's in 1926, the Second Assembly announced equal rights for women. But again, this is before Israel was formed, so it has just a declarative meaning, not something of a real substance. And when the country was formed in 1948, so the first Knesset, the first parliament in Israel, had 10% women, just 10%. But obviously it was already there. In 2003, we went up to 21%. And this year in 2021, we have 32% of women. So that's 38 members of the Knesset. And I just put, I'm sorry, this is the 23rd Knesset and the 24th Knesset. So the reason I put this is because the former Knesset that doesn't exist anymore had more women. And that is the top, that is the peak that we got, because we had 4 election cycles and the Knesset changed so much, to the 4 times in 2 years. So, the peak number was down in the 24th Knesset, which is the current one. But because this is just the beginning of 6 months into power, it may change, because some members, step down, some members are, there is a replacement. So the number of 35 women down here may rise up in the next couple of years, and we can go back to the highest number, not too far down the road, I hope. Just to give you a comparative, outlook. So again, the number in Israel is 29%, but it was already 32%. That's the highest number we got. And when you look at the United States, and can you see that good? Yeah. So again, we have 29 at the moment, but we were already at 32. And look at that. US House has 27.6. That's the current. And the Senate has 24%. So we are not in such a bad place, even though, what is 32%? I mean, it's hardly enough. We want to have 50%, right? In the UK, it's 34. French has, better situation than us, and then probably the rest of Europe. But the Nordic country, the Nordic states of Sweden, and it's not just Sweden, it's Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. They have the highest number in the world of 47, sometimes even 50, 49. So when we are talking about how to reach gender equality, we are looking into whatever is going on in those Nordic countries, and we have to learn from them because they set the standard. And obviously, we are not getting anywhere close to them. Just to talk about the evolvement of feminism in Israel. So we already had a prime minister who was a woman, that's Golda Meir. Actually, before I was in Chicago area, I was in Milwaukee, where she grew up. And when she went to school, and then when she worked as a librarian, and I think she worked in a store there. And from Milwaukee, she moved to Israel. She did have a couple of years in Denver in the middle with her sister, but then both of them went back to Milwaukee and made an aliyah to Israel, and she was the fourth prime minister, I think. Not the third, the fourth, yeah. So her era, she kept on saying, I'm not a feminist and I do not believe in feminism. You know, people compare her to Thatcher with very strong atmosphere. You know, some of the saying about her was, when you have these ministers with her in her cabinet, they say that she was the only man in the room. So that was a nice joke, because her cabinet, she made her own kitchen in her Tel Aviv apartment as the cabinet. She invited the ministers to her private residence, which was very, very tiny and modest. And in that kitchen, she was cooking for her fellow ministers and putting the food on the table. And in that atmosphere, they would go on the decisions and on the you know, country's military decisions or security decisions, because when we say cabinet, we mean actually a war cabinet. Now, she was you know, because of that, because of this war cabinet that was set up in her kitchen, up until today, when we are talking in politics, when we're talking about the cabinet, we call it a kitchenette. The midbachon, the midbach is the cabinet, the midbachon is like a little cabinet, and the kitchenette, you know. So when we talk about whoever makes decision, if it's now it's Naftali Bennett, but before that, that was Benjamin Netanyahu, we said, oh, there is a tension going up in the northern part of Israel with Hezbollah. The prime minister will better call his kitchenette to power. It will better get an advice from his kitchenette. This is how we use the words in Hebrew, and that's because of Golda's kitchen. The words stayed with us. I mean, I don't think she really cooked for them. It's like a myth, but she definitely did what many women, as we know, women in power do. They mix their private life with their public life, and they don't make the difference. They don't put the private life and say, this is my home. They just mix in everything, because they think this is a really good way to you know, manifest your powers. So I show a picture here with a cigarette, because she was a heavy smoker. She died of cancer, of course. But before she became a prime minister, she was welfare minister in Israel in the 50s. And she actually, as I said before, she said that she's not a feminist and that women have to work as hard as men in order to get to achievements. She did not believe in any, you know, in any, we call it affirmative action. No affirmative action for women. But with that, as a welfare minister in the 50s, before she became a prime minister, she was responsible for all the welfare laws of the state of Israel. It was like a new country back in 52, and the country did not have any type of equal payment law or equal housing laws and so on. And she was the one who enacted a very long lines of bills that gave women so many rights in the workforce, because she was a socialist, she came from the Labor Party, and so on. So all of Israel's infrastructure for women's rights, equal payment, equal entitlement in so many aspects, she was the one who was responsible for that. And that is amazing, because she actually opposed affirmative action, and she opposed so many of the rights of the women. But then when it came to enactment, she was very forceful. So that was her. And it's the Golda era, which is the first phase of political feminism in Israel, which means talking against it, but doing probably something for it, and not setting a really good personal, you know, not setting a really good personal model person, but actually working on issues. There is a little story about her when she enacted all of the labor's law. And she went into a hospital on the day. She was very conscious for PR and, you know, how to make yourself, you know, good in front of the reporters. So on the day she enacted one of the first labor rights law for women, she made sure she goes to the hospital and she greets the first woman who is giving labor to a child, and she's getting all the entitlement from the welfare, payments and so on for labor. And it's on TV. It's so funny. It's in the 50s. She's going into the hospital. Obviously, she's making sure she has cameras and reporters around her. She's making sure that someone of her assistants bring flowers so she can give the flowers to the woman who just gave birth. And the entire setting is done as if she was a Bibi or Trump, setting up the entire scene, getting into the hospital. And she was looking to congratulate this woman who they cherry-picked, of course. And the woman comes up to the camera and says, I am so thankful for your, I'm the first woman to get the payments, the first woman to get the stipends for the labor and so on. But I am a very sad woman today. And Golda goes out, why are you so sad? So sad. And she says, the woman says, because I was hoping for a boy and I got a fourth girl. And I was like, this is mind blowing. And she's like, I'm crying and my husband is trying to, is feeling sorry for me because now we have 4 girls. And this is hilarious. This is so funny. So labor laws and feminism of the 50s, this is what it looked like. Then you have, I'm skipping to Tzipi Livni, who was the justice minister, and Limor Livnat. Those 2 ministers, they were part of the Likud, then one of them left the Likud, but they kept telling people when they were in the party, they were the only women around. So, they were on the top of the ticket, maybe number 6 or 7, but there were no women around them. There was just like a sole appearance. None of them rise to the level of prime minister. Tzipi Livni almost got there. She actually won Netanyahu in 2009, but Netanyahu was more sophisticated in forming a coalition. And what is really important about those 2 politicians, and this is what they told me in person, and not just me, but they were telling their own political tale, is that they were trying to behave like men in order to be part of the gang. So obviously there are women, but they were not allowed to bring in their feminine voice into the play. So they were, you can see wearing suits and short cut hairstyle. And Limor Livnat actually told people, and she told me that also, that she was making her voice to be more muscular in her speeches. And she was making speeches like as if she was a man, because whenever she was, instead of standing in front of the crowds in the Likud party members, there were mostly men in the crowd. And then when you skip to today's era, this is Ayelet Shaked, number 2 in a conservative right-wing party with the pink dress. And the other one, this is Merav Michaeli, the chairwoman of Labor. Then I think you can see the difference. They are women in power. This is the women in power today, not ashamed of their feminine features, not trying to hide their squeaky voices or high voices. I hope I chose the right word here. Not ashamed in their looks, in their thoughts, in being moms. And Merav Michaeli, actually, this is a photo of her from recent months. She was opposing, okay, it's not the right word to say opposing. She said through her entire political career that she doesn't want to be a mom. And she made a point out of, I am choosing not to be a mother, and this is fine with my politics, with my feminist politics. I'm a woman, I don't have to be a mom. I don't have to bring, more kids into this world and so on. You are maybe familiar with this kind of discourse. But then about her husband is 10 years younger than her. About 6 months ago, he managed to persuade her to change routes, and they adopted they did a surrogacy, and she's 54 years old. So that's her firstborn, and she's 55 years old. And this is a photo that was taken in the hospital in the United States before embarking on the flights back to Israel. So she just became a mom just, couple of months ago. That was quite revolutionary for her after speaking against being a parent for so many years. So that's interesting because, this is the third level of feminism in Israel. Is very different from what we've seen in the past. And when we're talking about percentage and about representation in Israel, why can't we get to the 50%? We can't really get to the 50% because we have in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament has 126. Let's see if I can get this off from here. Can you see that? Can you see the numbers? I'm trying to move that away. I don't know if I can do it. Almost. Okay. It says the religious factor, 15 to 18 seats. So that's between 12% and 15% are blocked for women in Israel. And why is that? We have ultra-Orthodox parties. In the photos, you see, the leaders. This is the three leaders. This is the same person, Aryeh Deri. He's the leader of Shas. That's the Mizrahi ultra-Orthodox party. And these two other former ministers, is Gafni and Litzman, are both leaders of the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox. And they have no women in their party list. It's actually been taken to the High Court in appeals and in fights over the years again and again. And they keep on saying this is against the rabbis' instructions. This is against. They also say women in their society, in the ultra-Orthodox society, do not want to be in power. This is what they say, and they have lots of excuses. But this is the truth because they're these two parties compromise 15 to 18 seats. So whenever we are trying to reach beyond 40% or even close to 40%, this is blocked because out of 120, you have, it could be up to 18 seats who will not allow women to participate. And now I interviewed Aryeh Deri, this is him, the Shas leader, once, and I asked him, why won't you allow, women on your ticket? And he said, oh, we don't need that. The women in the Orthodox society are the main breeder. I mean, they are the workers. They work harder than the male because the men in the Orthodox society are yeshiva students. So our women they have the careers. They're not looking for a political career. And anyways, if I'm having any issues, I can always call my wife, and she gives, Yafa Deri, she gives, and this is really the answer that he gives in the radio. My wife, Yafa Deri, she knows everything. She knows how to solve everything, and she can give a great advice. She doesn't have to be in politics for that. That's a real answer from Israeli politics in 2021. That's unbelievable. But you must understand, in Israel, the political parties are financed by the taxpayers' money. So actually, I am, as an Israeli citizen, I am actually financing these guys. The money they get from the government to run a campaign is my money, and they exclude women. And it was taken to the High Court several times, and none of them was very successful. The last time, some women groups took it to the High Court with the claim that in the party's bylaws, in the party's, like constitution, there was a phrase saying this party is open for men only. It's actually written in the bylaws that were submitted to the Register of the Parties of Israel. So, I mean, some women organizations tried to attack that from saying you cannot have that written, black on white on a paper saying this is only for a man event only. So the party said, okay, so we erased that sentence from the bylaws of the party. So they erased it, and that's it. And it's not included in wording anymore. It's just included in the verbal instructions from the rabbi. So it did not make the change that we were hoping to make. So next slide. Okay. So challenges. Up here in this photo of this website this is an ultra-Orthodox website. I don't know if you can see, this is the 36th government that we saw just, a couple of minutes before. And, can you see the women faces? Can you tell what's going on here? Can you see in the back? So all of the women faces are erased. I mean, they are not erased, how do you say that? They washed off. Because this ultra-Orthodox website believes that they shouldn't show women's pictures. So if Hillary Clinton is running a campaign in the United States and this website is called Bechadrei Charedim, so it's like, it's a playful words on the word ultra-Orthodox. If Hillary Clinton is running in a campaign, they would do a story, and I know that because I was interviewed for that story, they would say H. Clinton, and the story will run without a photo of her. But when they would do a story about Trump, obviously they would run a photo of him. And when I'm interviewed when I was once interviewed in that paper, once they called me Mr. T. Schneider, and I actually threatened them with a lawsuit. I wrote to them, this is outrageous. I am not a Mr. and I'm not T. I am Tal Schneider. But, I want my photo and my title in the story. And I went to a lawyer, a friend, because I was a lawyer also, and I was a lawyer in media. So I have lots of friends in this area, in this profession. And she just sent them a letter saying, unless you correct this, Mrs. Tal Schneider is going to sue you for damages. So the following day, they had like a nice correction in the paper in print saying, "Oh, we are apologizing, Tal Schneider. It's a mistake. It's not a he. It's a she, and we are apologizing to her." Okay, but still, I mean, look at that. They are washing off women's faces because they don't want to show women's faces in the paper. So this is one challenge. Whenever this is happening, the entire media is just, like yelling and ridiculing them. And this is kind of stuff generates stories in the New York Times, New York Post, Washington Post, everywhere. But they don't care. Another challenge that we have, those two bottom photos show separation. If you see, I know you don't read Hebrew, but this is like a bus station in Bet Shemesh. That's a municipality outside of Jerusalem. It says line 422, Mehadrin, and men, you can see it in the front. This is what it says here. And women, it says indoors or inside, but it really means backwards of the bus. This is actually a sign that is letting know people on the street that if they want to ride separately with women and men, they can choose this line. And this is something that is not from too many years ago. This is like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And it's against the law, of course, right? It's against the law, but it's still happening. And on that sign up here, it says women are requested to avoid going through or staying in this sidewalk. So that
Everything okay? I'm sorry, what?
Such a shame. Yeah, I think it's, okay, let's do, since we have people here.
Yeah.
Let's,
And you have people here still.
they're still here?
Yeah, they are. Can you hear me now? I hear voices. Good. Thank you, Claire. Okay. I'm just gonna.
So
sit
what was
behind you.
supposed to be the next slide or so was about, because I can't see it right now. There was another photo there of a women pilot. So this is another new thing in Israel at the moment. Women can go into Air Force, and what we do have is we do have religious women going into the Air Force, becoming pilots, not just secular women. That's a new thing. We didn't have that in the past, and it's interesting to see the young Zionist religious. This is like probably modern Orthodox female joining combative, or semi-combative, or Air Force, and Navy and so on. And so it's really, really interesting to see that. Other challenges are obviously there is a huge gap between employment in the high-tech sector, or in any sectors really. There's more men engaged in high-tech, more men engaged in managing positions, in governmental positions. It's all over the map. It's like any other country in the world, I suppose. But we have, because it's a very traditional society, and I can get that now, but oh, you know what? The computer is not plugged. I mean, it's not getting any power. That's the reason it's shut down. But anyways, I'll just go through the. So we were almost done and ready for question and answers. So the gap in the high-tech society is 66% men and 34% women. In sports, 76% men and 23% women. In management positions, 80% men, 20% women. In the music industry, it's 77% men and it's 23% women. This is not numbers I came up with. This is in a research that was done in Van Leer Institute, if you're familiar with the name. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because this is really a challenge in Israel when you have a society that is so militarized and it's so traditional. You have lots of people who are Orthodox or religious. You have lots of people who are, even if in the secular society, men are coming to prominent positions through the military. The military is highly important in Israel's life. And obviously it's a mandatory service because women are serving in the military, but most of them are not staying for high ranks. And being in the military gives you such advantage in Israel's civil life. So this is actually, I'm almost done. And I think we can take questions. There was just one more thing I wanted to talk about. I got everybody here around me.
We're surrounding.
Yeah. So one thing I did not discuss, and I would be happy to go into during the question and answers, is if you want to talk about this new government and how it is working, because for the first time in Israel's history, we have an Islamist movement party signing a coalition agreement and becoming part of the government. And this is a very unique time in Israel's history. We never had the Arabs, who are 20% or 21% of Israel's society, engaged in such a way and being part of this new coalition. And the new coalition, when I'm saying this new coalition that has diverse, lots of women, they also have women from the people from the far right, from the far left. So Labor and Meretz, liberals, lefty parties are sitting together in the same government, with the Yamina or New Hope that are party that are coming from the very conservative right-wing side. So for Americans' audience, just imagine this is having the Justice Democrats sitting together with the Tea Party in the same government, the same executive power. So can you imagine Bernie Sanders being a minister together with Ted Cruz in the same government? This is what we have at the moment in Israel. It's really unheard of. It not just in Israel, it's just unheard of in many places. It's a very unique situation, and they fight each other all day long. But then they go on a Sunday morning, they have the the cabinet meeting, and they go into the room and they just make a decision. Making decisions, they already passed the budget and so on. So with that, let's go into questions, or I can keep on talking if you don't have any questions.
Hi, Janet. The slide that you had talking about 15 to 18.
Mm-hmm. By election. So they have a public power, they have lots of voters who believe in this approach of excluding women.
So right now we have the two opposite sides of the spectrum working together, but is there actually trials? So whether or not it's becoming less of a religious society.
Okay.
Can you
So-
repeat the question?
Sure. So the question was, do I see a change in those groups being more engaged and becoming a little bit less orthodox, and maybe in the future will engage women in their lives? And I guess my answer to you is probably some people are afraid of the opposite, because as you know, ultra-Orthodox have between 8 to 12 kids. So, and obviously seculars, Arabs, and religious Zionists do not have as many kids as they do have. So basically, if we are looking at the trends from the inception of the State of Israel, you would expect the ultra-Orthodox to become much, more than 18 seats, more than 15%, right? Because if they have so many kids, I mean, the country has been, the country is already 73 years old. And they should have, been in power and be in much power, because if all of the ultra-Orthodox have so many, huge families, and all of them are voting by the rabbi's instructions, by that time, by the present time, they should have been much bigger society. So if you look at the demographic trends, actually, people were expecting the ultra-Orthodox to be around not 15%, but maybe 20%, but it didn't happen. So how come it didn't happen? There are two explanations. One, that people do not explore the fact that many ultra-Orthodox are just stepping out of being ultra-Orthodox. They are becoming maybe just, not just secular, they're just becoming just, religious people, traditional people, but not ultra-Orthodox. That's one explanation. So again, if the trends were absolutely one-way direction, they would have, at least the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox, they would have not just 6 seats, they would have 9 seats. But they do not, they have 6 or 7 seats, and it remains the same 6 or 7 seats every election, even though their population is supposedly growing really, really fast. The other explanation, and that's the explanation I like better, is that when they go to the polls, they actually don't do what the rabbi told them to do. So they say that they vote for ultra-Orthodox, but then, elections are secret. Nobody can poke his nose into your ballot. You can do whatever you want. So you have women and men, maybe, going to the polls and just voting something else. So that's another explanation. But when you ask me if I see a way for them to become less orthodox, I do not see that. And obviously they have six, let's say the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox, which have 67 seats, obviously they get their votes from women and from men. So you have at least half women from that society who are voting for parties without women. I told their leaders, I'm a secular person, but for the purpose of making a point, I told them, if you bring a woman at the top of the ticket, it doesn't have to be the chairwoman, but in the one, on a 1, 2, 3, 4 spot, okay, she can be on number 4, number 5. She just has to be in she can't be number 20 because they only have 6 seats, right? So if you bring women to the top of the list, I will vote for you. I would vote as a woman. And why did I mean, as a reporter, I told them that even though I don't believe in any of their agenda, I wrote that and said that to make a point to tell them, if you will be equal rights party, like, the rest of the parties are claiming to be, you will not have just 6 seats, you will have more seats. But they think quite the opposite. They think that if they will bring women into the ticket, they will have less voting. By the way, when Israel was formed, when Israel was born, the ultra-Orthodox, okay, so the Mizrahi Orthodox, which is Shas, it's the other party, they were,
Explain
Mizrahi, it's like Jews that came from Morocco, Iraq, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, all the Arab countries. And as opposed to Ashkenazi, this is European Jews from Russia and so on. They still have this division. So when the country was born, the Mizrahi party was not in power. They came into power only in 1983. But the Ashkenazi was already in power, and they had an internal debate. Should we grant our women the right to vote or no? This is in 1948. So Israel women had voting power in the Zionist institution. Women had a voting power. I mean, even before, yes, everywhere, even before the beginning of the century. So the Jewish establishment gave women power to vote in the Jewish organizations, when still in the United States and in Switzerland, women did not have the right to vote. Obviously, the right to vote in the United States is 1919, right? I think the 90th Amendment. And the Jewish establishment already gave women the right to vote. But the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox, when the country was born, said, let's think about it. Why should we give women the right to vote? And then one of the rabbis came over to them and told them, guys, if you don't let women vote for the ultra-Orthodox parties, you're going to have, instead of 6 seats in the parliament, you're going to have 3 seats. Do you want to do that? Or do you want to be clever and have the women of your communities participating and have double, So whenever it serves them for political gains, women have equal rights to vote, but whenever it's about power and control, they make sure the women are not participating. And that's where the debate is. And right now, it seems they have no intention of changing it whatsoever.
We have a question from Zoom. Are any of the political parties more female friendly? Do Israeli women support one party over another, or is that a minor issue?
So Israel is part of a worldwide trend where women vote more to the left and liberal sides. This is the case in the United States. It's also the case in Western Europe. It's the same in Israel. By the way, it wasn't always the case. This is a trend, not in Europe, not in the United States, and not in Israel. This trend began in the 80s or so, like about 20 years after women went into the workforce. 20 to 30 years after women went into the workforce, they started to be more engaged in welfare, infrastructures, education, healthcare, and so on. And then, not all of them, but many women just, shifted a bit to the liberals left. It's the same case in Israel. Labor and Meretz and, you know, the centrist parties have higher percentage of women than the right side. Having said that, it's not like the right side doesn't have women. I mean, the change is the gender gap is not as big as, you know, as you would expect. What was the other part of the so
Are there
yeah,
any other
so
issues?
because, you know, for example, Labor has Merav Michaeli, who is the chairwoman. She is definitely not the first woman to chair that party. She is the third, because before that, they had Sheri Yachimovich as opposition leader. And before that, they obviously had Golda Meir as the prime minister. That's the Labor Party. Meretz, it's also a lefty liberal green party. They have in their own bylaws and in their own constitution, they need to have at least, I think, 50%, and most of the time they have 60%. They also had 2 women at least at the top of the ticket. Former Minister Shulamit Aloni, I don't know if the name rings a bell. She was the education minister in Rabin's government in 1992. She's already deceased by now, but she was a groundbreaking feminist with lots of precedents and things that she did. And they had Tamar Zandberg, she was the chairwoman, now she is, obviously they had Zahava Gal'on, now they had Tamar Zandberg, who I told you earlier that she was the EPA minister. So 3 women already were chairwoman of this party. And let me think of Ayelet Shaked, who is number 2 to Naftali Bennett, ran on the top of the ticket. As I told you, we had 4 election cycles. On the second cycle, Bennett came up and said, I failed. Bennett, of course, is now the current prime minister. After the first election cycle, he said, I failed because they didn't even cross the threshold. And Ayelet Shaked was put at the top of the ticket. They got 7 seats with her. This could have been interesting if they would go into government, but then Netanyahu didn't want to have any kind of government, and we went into the 3rd election. So they switched back again, and Naftali Bennett went back to be at the top of the ticket. So they switch with each other. I hope that answered the question.
Are there any other questions? Lee?
Yeah, I want to go back to the slide, the last slides that you had up, which were the street signs.
Mm-hmm.
About where women were supposed to sit and where they were allowed or not allowed on the sign.
Right.
And when I'd like a little bit of clarification, because it would seem to me that Orthodox segregation of men and women is by choice. So how does that compare to discriminatory segregation by sex as a secular issue versus a religious issue?
So
Does that make sense?
so the question was about a segregation of separation of women and men in the ultra-Orthodox society as compared to separation in the secular society.
Among the ultra-Orthodox, it's by choice. Women are on board with it.
Mhm.
Women support that as well. So how does that square in
Okay.
society
So the question was about,
with oppressive
Mhm.
segregation, you know,
Mhm.
secular legal?
So for the Zoom followers, for the Zoom listeners, I would just repeat and say that the question is about how come that in the ultra-Orthodox society, the separation or segregation seems to be by choice as compared to the secular society in which there isn't any separation. So I don't know what you're referring to, because when I showed those slides, it was only in ultra-Orthodox society and ultra-Orthodox streets or neighborhood. It was not done in a secular areas. It is against the law, by the way. It is against the law, but the problem is that on the municipal level, because there is a whole trend of separation in Israel where ultra-Orthodox live in the same neighborhoods and cities separated from mostly from some secular. So you do see on the municipal level, these things take place. Now, whenever a feminist group or a secular group is, you know, they understand what happened in the city of Beit Shemesh, they cry out loud, they call the media, they go to Supreme Court and so on, and they fight it. Now, women of the Orthodox society, as you mentioned, seems to be agreeing to these rules. But I'm not sure that is the case. They are under a severe stress because if a woman in the ultra-Orthodox society, for example, will run to be a mayor or will want to run to be a council member of a city, she may get her kids expelled from schools, right? So, I mean, she and her husband, it's not just her, it's the family. So there is a major threats and local campaigns in the municipalities against women who are trying out to be council members or trying out to be prominent in their, small villages or small town. So when you ask me, do the ultra-Orthodox women agree to that? I would tell you that they are probably afraid or concerned about the consequences. And I don't think they really like those rules. I don't think it's really, I don't think they're really cooperating on that. They just don't have a choice. It sounds really awful, but they do make a choice as per their, you choose the way you live, the way you want to live your life. But having said that, it's really hard to get out because the implication is boycott, is being expelled from the family and so on. And I think, some of them, they speak only Yiddish, they were brought up in a certain way that, they don't teach English and math in high school and so on. So the options for the Orthodox are very, very restrictive. And they want to, everyone wants to stay, attached to his own families. It's huge families. You don't want to get out of that. It's like a warm atmosphere, and it has its own advantages for some people. So
I think anyone who's been on a bus in Israel realizes it's not easy to get on, it's not easy to get off. So having to move to the back, nobody wants that. Any other questions?
that's true. She's a woman. Right. Right, that's important to note. So Bet Shemesh, that's the very, very Orthodox society. They do have a woman as a mayor since the last 3 years. And she is also playing a major role in setting a model on one side. On the other hand, she is aware. I mean, she will not allow those signs to stay on, the signs of the buses and so on. But then on the other side, she definitely respects the other restrictions of this society. So, I mean, I interviewed her as well, and she's walking a very thin line. For example, people are spraying on women's faces if you have like public, ads or, autobus ads and so on. They spray paint their faces. She will probably be against it, but she will not be very powerful in, how do you say that? Oh, there is an example for that. We had a general election, 4 election cycles, and some people in Bet Shemesh requested that the political ads will not include women, including herself when she ran. And she was okay with that. She said, I'm respectful for this claim. And I was like, how can you agree to have your political ads without your face? And, you are agreeing your face to be removed from political ads in the city that you are trying to run as a mayor. And she says, life is complicated. I want them to choose me. In order to get them to choose me, I don't want to be in their face. So I'm off their face. And she won. I mean, can you imagine such a complex life? Yeah. But she's definitely a woman, definitely, and a very powerful and interesting one. And she is, by the way, ultra-Orthodox herself. But I mean, yeah.
We have another question here. Can you tell us about your newspaper, relatively new political affiliation?
Okay.
So the Times of Israel, and I'll put it in the chat in a hot minute, you can follow online. And
it's free.
Yeah.
It is, these days, it's the biggest website in English from Israel. Haaretz used to be the biggest website, but Haaretz went behind the payment wall
Yes, it
a couple of
did.
years ago, so that's dropped their numbers. Since you do have also the Jerusalem Post, which is more right-wing inclined than, and Haaretz, it's a left, liberal inclined. The Times of Israel was set up 10 years ago to be somewhere in the middle of those two. And it doesn't have like this blunt agenda. I know for sure from my chief executive editor, David Horowitz, he's very anti-corruption, which means, in the current Times of Israel, being anti-corruption means basically being upset with the former Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was sitting in as a prime minister under a corruption trial. Now he is no longer in power. So that gives a relief to people that are anti-corruption because they can write about other things. So my boss, David Horowitz, is definitely anti-corruption, but if you look at his, his and the papers on, I think on security issues, I think they are a little bit more to the right on the security arena, but on conversion and on engagement with diaspora and on, I would say, kashrut, hechsher, and then on the Western Wall, and on all of those issues, they are more, all of the religious affairs, there are more liberals. Many of the people who work in that paper, in that newspaper, are religious Jews with kippah and everything, not me personally, but many of the rest of them. The paper, Times of Israel, it's really important to say, we are in English, but we have an Arabic section, a huge Arabic section. So it's also one of the most read papers in Israel in Arabic. And we also have French, Arabic, and Farsi. So it comes out in all of those languages. And about 2 years ago, we opened up a Hebrew small website. It's called Zman Israel, Times of Israel, but Zman Israel. And it's we call it a sister site because it's not as big as the English site. It's a very relatively more features and more, it doesn't have like the bit of reporting. It has only features and it's in Hebrew. So I am the political writer for both, for the Hebrew side, for the English side, the English website. For the English website, I do not report on every breaking news or bit reporter. I'm mostly doing, but in Hebrew, I'm doing bit reporting. In English, I'm doing more of a features and interviews. You can look up the Times of Israel, a story we had about Israel's current president Herzog, how he becoming now, a bigger statement than we thought he would be. And there is another very interesting, to my opinion, interview with the Minister of Religious Affairs, Matan Kahana. I highly recommend that interview because he was talking about the Western Wall, about conversion, about hechsher, about, all of the issues that are, relating to Jewish life, inside and outside of Israel. So he's a very interesting person.
We have to wrap up. Sealan, one last question.
I'll pass.
All right, Rabbi.
I know you're not a fortune teller, but if you could pick one of these women politicians, that this one will be prime minister one day.
Well, I am a fortune teller because we do know that Yair Lapid is the next prime minister because,
He's the next prime
yeah, because there is a rotation agreement.
No. It's one of the women.
One of the women.
Oh, the women. I would say Ayelet Shaked. She's on the, first of all, I think, you probably need to look at people from the right wing of Israel because the right wing is much more powerful than the left in Israel. So Merav Michaeli, who is the labor chief, she has aspirations to be a prime minister. She says that, but truly, I don't believe that's in the cards for her or for anyone in Israel. From the right wing, Ayelet Shaked is a very powerful persona. This is the minister that I showed you back, like half an hour ago in the pink dress. She is very, how to say that, very conservative, very powerful. She's not religious, she's secular, but she is, that's the really good word to describe her. She's very disciplined. So she is, and she doesn't know how to make jokes. She doesn't know how to be, you know, lovely or soft or whatever. She's like work, work, work. She was the justice minister before. She will be the justice minister again in 2 years from now in the rotation agreement. And she thinks the justice minister is like a really important role in Israel. Many people think that. And since she's so disciplined and so, you know, I would say, how do you say, like zero focused or razor focused on her agenda and being so disciplined about it. That's my thought. From the rest of them, that she's the one. So Merav Michaeli, I say she's coming from the labor left, and this is not going to happen probably in Israel in the next 50 to 40 years or so, 40 to 50 years. I don't think the Israeli left is going anywhere. I mean, right now we have the left in the government. It's kind of a little miracle. Just cherish the time. It's not going to stay long. They are in power right now, probably not for a long time. It's fun to see them because, you know, the Meretz ministers coming from the liberal, very, you know, this is like the progressive or the Justice Democrats. They've never intended to be in power for their life. They were just chosen to be in opposition. I don't think they ever dreamed of becoming ministers. They were in such shock when they became ministers. I mean, there's like, you know, this is not really happening. It's really like having Bernie Sanders as the president of the United States. Really, they are Bernie Sanders type, liberals, lefty, pacifist, against war, against, you know, against occupation, against, they want to see the two-state solution and so on. So with all of those beautiful agendas, they have very little crowds to support them. And that's, you know, I'm sorry, that's, you know, the facts of life in Israel.
Mrs. Tal Schneider, we want to thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll have the recording. I will send the recording to you soon if anyone wants it. And just thank you. And you're getting kudos.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.